The title of this talk is Look Within for Insight. So again, the process of detox is the process of letting go. It's a process of letting go of actually a past identity, and we'll get into that in a few more lessons. But basically, who you've been up to this point will not be the same. If you really do a detox, it won't be the same as who you will be when you emerge, and that's just part of how evolution happens. Is it moves in cycles, it moves in rhythms, it moves in waves. And part of the way of deepening it, where we left off with like you do you, and part of you do you is you get super curious about what's happening, because there's usually a lot happening the more you're taking the time to be curious by, basically reducing the level of stuff coming in by choosing high quality and low quantity versus high quantity and low quality. And you're doing that in your foods, but you're also doing it in everywhere, like even in your thinking, like low quality thoughts, like I don't entertain those anymore. And you might be finding in the process of walking more and doing more, sculpting your hands and your body to shape yourself. And as you're doing that, experiencing just more openness and more flow, more space, consciousness, that as you're doing all these things, that you are experiencing more of just presence of being. Not just, you're experiencing more presence and being. And in this, you start to, rather than like reaching into life, you start to allow life to just come to you. And that's what happens when we are in this deeper process of processing, right? And that's about where you should be right now, is in that process where you're processing. So you don't need to take much stimulus. You might find you really don't need much nutrition, or you might, certain days you might need a lot more, and that's fine. Taking what you need to take in, by all means. You want to nourish, use the foods that sustain and nourish through detoxing, not like create this deprivation thing that never works, not for the long term anyways. And in the process, what happens as things start to come to you is you start to notice that there's an easier way, right? So when you're more true to yourself, life will start to get easier. You'll start to find that you're more residing in space consciousness, and that you're more intuitive, you're more in alignment with clear desire. If like, oh, I want to eat that, or I need some more hot water with cinnamon and cardamom, or whatever it is, right? And in the process, you're starting to notice that desire comes up in so many different ways. And you might be hearing desires from your body more clearly. We find this as people go on a healing journey, as they start to feel their body's need for sleep. And sometimes this is scary. I mean, if you have an autoimmune disorder, this can be really scary, because there can be years. Sometimes even I've worked with people often in Living Ayurveda course who it's been decades where the body's been just exhausted and calling out for deep rest, for deep solutions to be able to rest deeply. And the self, the person's just kind of plowed on through and gone into deeper and deeper states of, sleep deprivation, degeneration. So the immune system falls apart, right? Systems just start to fall apart without the renewal part of the cycle. So as you go into detox, you're going into a deep renewal part of the cycle. And as you do that, you might notice like, oh, wow, my next desire is like it's a different program than I was planning on. And that's good, and that's fine. And often it's simpler. It's often, always actually, will have your long-term goals in front of your short-term goals. And that's a very important place to live. Like if you really want to be successful, that's the way to live, is you keep putting your long-term goals, those long-term goals, you just keep moving them into your daily habits, and that changes things. That radically starts to change your future and creates more of this evolutionary path, and you start to have habits that are regenerative. And what happens often in the process of a detox, and for some people it can come, it can take later to come. For sometimes you get little insights along the way. Other people who just have less toxicity within, they're just like instantly like, oh my gosh, this is even more amazing than I thought. But the whole idea is that wow, I can feel this good. Often the process is in your detox is you start to change your trajectory. Right? So all of a sudden you're on a different trajectory. You have different insights. Your perspective has changed, and your perspective changes because now you're in a different place. You're not in the same place your habits were going. You're not on that trajectory, which may have been leading you towards poorer health or just status quo. It can be a status quo experience of yourself. And then bam, you go into detox mode and you're in the process of it, and it just like up levels you a notch. So you can see the path you were on. You can see where that was going. And you can also, because now you're on a different path, you can see where that might be leading, and you can make some choices in alignment with that. And again, the way you start to make those choices at this phase of the game is you just, you reside in the curiosity, and you allow the fire to do the work. You allow the Agni to start to digest. And it's digesting whatever it is that the physiology wants to let go of, from subtle to gross, again, from mental or emotional to all the way down to physical. And in that process, you're not as hungry for new experiences or for heavier foods. You're not really at all interested at that point in filler. Like the filler should just be even less appealing or not appealing at all, or even just like actually taste toxic. that will happen if you go deep enough into the process, where you realize that which is toxic to the body actually does taste toxic to the mouth. And same thing with just overeating. That starts to feel toxic in itself. So what I want you to notice, this whole idea of to thine own self be true, and to thy next self to be curious, is as you're looking within for insight, just notice how subtle desires, they can be the smallest things, just what you're deeply attuned with, attracted to, what you really want to experience next in your life, and have spaciousness. You can find spaciousness. Everyone can find spaciousness. And sometimes it's just these little tiny gaps in the day, and let those gaps start to grow. A lot of it has to do with how you're using your mind, and to allow thoughts to go by the wayside, and to allow emotions to be felt deeply. You feel your emotions and they change, and your thinking changes as your emotional body changes. So you just allow the emotions that come up to be digested. That's working on yourself internally. That's what that means. It's just allowing the stuff, allowing the emotions, there can be a lot of toxicity in emotion. It's just allow it to be felt in the feeling body. Don't think about the emotions. Don't think the thoughts around the emotions. Just actually let your physiology digest emotion. It's really as simple as feeling in your body, and you can name it. That helps. A lot of people will do that. And they do a body check-in and say they feel like, oh my gosh, I really, really want whatever your version of addiction is. And like, you're trying not to do that right now. Like maybe it's filler foods or filler experiences or whatnot. And you're trying not to do that right now. And you're just like, let me just feel what that feels like to want that. And let me go for a walk and do some breathing and then feel again. And oh, wow, things feel different now. And that's how evolution happens. It's really like one little mini episode of that at a time, where you're changing the way you're making decisions. The more you're changing the way you're making decisions, you start to experience like, wow, I can choose to feel really, really good. And that's regenerative. And that has a totally different trajectory. So that when I do that over time, and I keep having these breakthroughs, it actually stabilizes, and it goes somewhere. It goes on an evolutionary current. And we'll talk more about these evolutionary currents coming up. For now, I just want to emphasize, just keep looking within for insight. I promise you it's there. And keep sipping.